The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Maya Chen had been awake anyway. She had been awake because she was always awake at 2:47 in the morning during the third week of her double rotation, which was the particular cruelty of being a pediatric nurse at Sancthin. Ambrose General, not the prestigious wing, not the private floors with the soft lighting and the concierge service and the rooms that smelled like fresh linen instead of antiseptic, but the fourth floor, the public ward, where the families sat in plastic chairs and the vending machine outside room 412 had been broken for 6 weeks and nobody had fixed it. She was eating crackers from her bag and reading a chart when her supervisor appeared in the doorway with an expression Maya had never seen on her before. Margaret Assey had been the head of pediatric nursing at St. Ambrose for 19 years. She had the calm of someone who had seen everything and the efficiency of someone who had learnt that panic cost time she didn't have. She did not rattle. She was rattled now. "Maya," she said, "I need you." "Which room?" "Not this floor." A pause. 17. Maya set down her crackers. Floor 17 was the private wing. Floor 17 had its own elevator that required a separate key card, its own staff, its own everything. Floor 17 was where St. Ambrose kept the patients whose names appeared in financial reports and whose stays were managed by hospital administrators rather than charge nurses. Maya had never been to floor 17. "There's been a request," Margaret said, in the careful tone of someone choosing words that would not set anything on fire. "A specific request. For you. For me," Maya repeated. "Why? Because you saved the Okonkwo baby last spring." The respiratory case everyone else had written off. Margaret met her eyes. Someone noticed. Maya thought about that for a moment. The Okonkwo baby had been 7 months old and had been deteriorating for 3 weeks, while 4 different specialists debated the diagnosis. Maya had spent 40 minutes one Tuesday afternoon just watching him breathe, not reviewing charts, not consulting literature, just watching, and had noticed something in the rhythm of it that didn't match any of the 4 diagnoses on the table. She had been right. She had also been told, quietly but clearly, by 2 of the 4 specialists that she had overstepped. "Who's the patient?" she asked. Margaret handed her a single sheet of paper. Maya looked at it. The name at the top was not the patient's name. It was the name of the person who had requested her specifically, whose signature sat at the bottom of a private medical authorization form, whose name she recognized because it appeared on the side of 2 buildings in the city and on the donor wall in the hospital lobby in letters large enough to read from across the room. Nicholas Reyes. Below the authorization, 3 words written by hand in the tight, controlled script of someone who was not accustomed to asking for things and was finding it difficult. "Please. She's dying." The private elevator opened onto a corridor that was, as advertised, nothing like the 4th floor. Soft overhead light. Pale grey walls. The sound of a monitor somewhere, steady and low. Margaret had briefed her on the way up. Isla Reyes, 8 months old. Admitted 11 days ago with a fever that had not responded to treatment. 14 specialists, 14 from 4 different countries, 2 of them flown in privately, had examined her, run every test available, and arrived at 14 different opinions, none of which had produced any improvement. Her oxygen levels were dropping, her weight was down. She had stopped responding to stimuli 2 days ago. in a way that the neurologist had described in a report Maya had skimmed in the elevator as concerning but inconclusive, which was the medical equivalent of saying, "I don't know," in a way that deflected liability. "The father," Margaret said quietly, just before they reached the room. She paused. "Prepare yourself." Maya had prepared herself for many things in 8 years of pediatric nursing. She had prepared herself for grief and for anger and for the particular desperation of parents who would run out of things to try. She had prepared herself for difficult families. She had not entirely prepared herself for Nicholas Reyes. He was standing at the window when she entered, tall, dark-suited, despite the hour, with the kind of stillness that came not from calm, but from a person who had exhausted every version of movement available to them and had arrived, finally, at this. He turned when the door opened. He looked like a man who had not slept in 11 days. He looked like a man who had spent 11 days being told things by very important people and watching his daughter get worse anyway, and who had arrived somewhere in the small hours of this particular morning, at the end of his ability to absorb information without result. He looked at Maya, at her 4th floor badge, her practical shoes, the cracker crumbs she had almost certainly missed on her scrub top, and she saw the calculation cross his face. The same calculation she suspected that had preceded the phone call to Margaret. The acknowledgement that the expensive option had failed 14 times and that something else was needed, even if something else arrived in the form of a nurse from the public ward at 3 in the morning. "You're Maya Chen," he said. "Yes. They told me about the Okonkwo case. I heard." He held her gaze. His eyes were dark and exhausted and completely direct. "Can you help her?" It was not quite a question. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't seen her yet." Something in his jaw tightened, not with impatience, she thought, but with the effort of a man holding himself together by a thread and choosing, very deliberately, which threads to hold. He stepped aside from the window. Maya turned to the crib. Isla Reyes was very small, 8 months old, and small even for that, dark hair, her father's coloring, her tiny chest rising and falling in the shallow, effortful way that Maya recognized immediately as a body working harder than it should have to. The monitors around her beeped softly. The foreline in her small arm was taped with the precise care of the private floor nurses. Maya pulled a chair to the side of the crib and sat down. She did not pick up the chart. She did not review the 14 specialist reports stacked on the table beside the door. She did not ask any of the 40 questions that were standard procedure. She watched. Nicholas Reyes stood behind her and said nothing. She was aware of him, the controlled tension of him, the held breath, and she set it aside the way she set everything aside when she was doing this. When she was giving a patient the thing that cost nothing and was somehow the rarest thing in medicine, full, uninterrupted attention. She watched Isla breathe for 20 minutes. She watched the way her fingers moved, the way her eyes moved beneath her closed lids, the way she turned her head, just slightly, twice, in the direction of the window both times, the way her breathing changed, fractionally, where Nicholas shifted his weight behind Maya and then changed back. She watched the monitor, not the numbers, the patterns. After 20 minutes, she stood, picked up the chart, and read it from the beginning. All of it, not the summaries, not the conclusions. The raw data, the intake notes, the nursing observations logged every 4 hours in the careful shorthand of the floor staff. There was something in the nursing notes from day 3, 1 line, written by a night nurse named Patricia, who had logged it, and then, as far as Maya could tell from the subsequent notes, never followed up on it. Possibly because, by day 4, the cardiologist had arrived and the cardiology team had taken over the narrative. Infant shows mild startle response to low-frequency sound. Possible auditory sensitivity. Monitor. It had not been monitored. Maya set the chart down very carefully. "Mr. Reyes," she said. He was beside her immediately. "What? When Isla is at home, before she was admitted, where did she sleep?" He stared at her. "What does that, please, a beat? Her nursery." "On the 3rd floor. What's on the 2nd floor?" "Directly below." He was quiet for a moment. She could see him pulling up a floor plan in his mind. "My office. And He stopped. "The building's HVAC system has a secondary unit on that floor. We had it serviced 2 months ago. There was a..." He stopped again, differently this time. "There was a vibration issue, a low-frequency hum. The engineer said it was within normal range." "Low-frequency sound," Maya said, "in that range, between 20 and 100 Hz, can in rare cases cause a sustained stress response in infants. Elevated corticals, disrupted sleep architecture, suppressed immune function." She kept her voice level. "It wouldn't show up on any of the standard panels. It isn't a pathogen. It isn't a structural defect. It's an environmental stressor that her body has been fighting for 2 months, he said. His voice had changed entirely. Since the service, Asteriska didn't want to confer with an audiologist and run a cortisol panel. But yes, Asterisk. She looked at him. "I think your daughter isn't sick. I think she's exhausted." The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something large has shifted. Nicholas Reyes looked at his daughter in the crib. Then he looked at Maya. And for the first time in 11 days, she could see it. Plainly, in the loosening of every held thing in his face, he looked like a man who had been given something to hold on to. "Fix it," he said, not harshly, with the whole weight of a person handing over the only thing that mattered to them. "Whatever you need, fix it. I'll do my best," she said. "Your best," he said quietly, "is the only thing that's worked so far." The audiologist arrived at 6 in the morning. Maya had not left the floor. She had called in the request herself, which was, strictly speaking, outside her scope, and which Margaret had approved with the particular expression of someone who understood that the rules existed for good reasons and that this was not one of those moments. The cortisol panel had been drawn at 4. The results came back at 5:40. And Maya had looked at them for a long time before she walked to Nicholas Reyes, who had spent the intervening hours in the chair beside his daughter's crib, with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped and his eyes on Isla's face. "The cortisol," she said, sitting across from him. "It's elevated, significantly, in a pattern consistent with chronic low-grade stress response rather than acute illness." He looked at the paper she placed in front of him. He was not, she noticed, a man who needed things explained slowly. He read the numbers and understood them. All 14 of them ran this panel. They ran it looking for an endocrine disorder, she said. The numbers were elevated, but not elevated enough to confirm any of the diagnoses they were testing for, so it got filed as a secondary finding. Asterisk, she paused. Nobody was looking for the pattern. They were looking for a disease, and you looked for something else. I looked at her, Maya said simply. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was beginning its morning, the particular grey-pink light of a city that never entirely slept, coming through the glass and laying itself across the floor of the room. "She looks like her mother," he said. It was the first personal thing he had said. Maya waited. "Her mother passed away," he said, in the flat, careful tone of a man who had built a structure around a fact and maintained it by not examining the structure too closely. 14 months ago. Complications after the birth. "I'm sorry," Maya said. "Isla has been in my care since she was 3 days old." He looked at his daughter. "I have 17 people on staff. I hired the best neonatal consultant in the country. I have done." He stopped. "I have done everything correctly." "You have," Maya said. And yet, she agreed. "Sometimes, the thing that's wrong isn't on any list." He looked at her then with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. Not the controlled desperation of the man at the window. Not the directness of the man who had asked her if she could help. Something more unguarded. The look of a person who has been operating on pure will for a very long time and has just, in the company of a stranger, allowed themselves to be tired. "How did you know to look at the nursing notes?" he said. "Because nurses are in the room longer than anyone else," she said. "We notice things that don't fit the current hypothesis because we don't have a hypothesis. We just have the patient." He absorbed that. "Patricia," Maya added, "the nurse who logged the observation on day 3. She's good. She noticed something real. I'll make sure she knows that," he said. It was a small thing. Maya noted it anyway. The instinct, even exhausted, even at 6 in the morning after 11 days of this, to credit the person who had done something right. It told her something about him that the building with his name on it and the 14 specialists and the private elevator had not. The audiologist arrived 20 minutes later. The assessment took 40 minutes. The results confirmed what Maya had suspected. By 9 in the morning, a different kind of specialist, an environmental acoustics engineer, had been contacted. By noon, Nicholas Reyes had arranged for Isla to be moved to a different room on the floor, away from the hospital's own HVAC outputs, as a test environment. By 6 in the evening, Isla's oxygen levels had improved by 4%. By midnight, she had opened her eyes. She was reaching for her bag to leave when he appeared in the corridor. Maya had been on shift for 22 hours. She was operating on the particular clarity that lived on the other side of exhaustion. Everything slightly too bright, slightly too detailed, the kind of state where small things became very vivid. The scuff on her left shoe, the way the corridor light hummed, the sound of his footsteps, which she recognized before she turned around. "You're leaving," he said. "My shift ended 3 hours ago." "I know." He stopped a few feet away. He had taken off his jacket at some point. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, and he looked not less formidable exactly, but differently formidable. A man who had let the architecture down slightly. "Thank you. Thank Patricia," Maya said. "She found it first. I have." A pause. "I also made a donation to the 4th floor nursing fund." Margaret seemed to feel it was appropriate. Maya looked at him. "You didn't need to do that, I'm aware." He held her gaze. It wasn't about need. She adjusted the strap of her bag. She was tired in the way that went all the way down. And standing in a corridor at midnight, talking to Nicholas Reyes, was not something she had the architecture for right now. She'll need monitoring. The environmental issue at home needs to be fully remediated before she goes back. I'd recommend. I've already engaged the firm, he said. They start Monday. A beat. I'd like you to be involved in her care, going forward. As her primary nurse, Maya stared at him. I work the 4th floor. I've spoken to the hospital administrator. You can't just... She stopped. The look on his face was not arrogant. It was simply the expression of a man who existed in a world where most logistical problems were solvable with sufficient resources, and who had not yet fully updated his model to account for the fact that some things, some people, did not work that way. I'm asking, he said, not arranging. I should have said that first. The correction surprised her. Why me? She said. There are private floor nurses who are excellent, who are trained specifically for... Because you sat next to her crib for 20 minutes and watched her breathe, he said. Asterisk bear, you looked at a single chart. Asterisk, he paused. I've had 14 specialists in that room. Not one of them did that. Maya was quiet. She responds to you, he said, more quietly. I watched her this afternoon. When you came in to check the monitors, she turned toward you. Infants respond to calm, Maya said. It isn't personal. Maybe, he said. I'd still like her to have access to whatever it is you have. She looked at him for a long moment. He looks back, directly, without performance, with the particular honesty of a man who had spent 11 days being told what he wanted to hear by people, who were afraid of him, and had arrived, on the other side of it, at a preference for something else. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. She nodded once and walked to the elevator. She thought about it for the entire ride down. She thought about it in the taxi home. She thought about it lying on her bed in her apartment, still in her scrubs, staring at the ceiling while the city moved outside her window. She thought about Isla turning toward her. She thought about a man who had said, I'm asking, not arranging, and meant it. She called Margaret at 7 in the morning. Yes, she said. I'll do it. Scene 4. Close quarters. The arrangement was professional. Maya told herself that every morning for the first 2 weeks, with the particular firmness of someone who understood the difference between what something was and what it could become if she wasn't careful. She was Isla's primary nurse. She came to floor 17 at 7, did her assessment, coordinated with the pediatric team, updated the charts. Nicholas Reyes was present for the morning rounds when his schedule allowed, which was most mornings, because whatever else he was a father who showed up. He was always there before her. She noticed that on day 3 and filed it away. Isla improved steadily. The acoustic remediation at the Reyes residence was completed in 8 days. Maya had reviewed the engineer's report at Nicholas's request, which was also, strictly speaking, outside her scope, and which she had done anyway because the report mattered and she wanted to understand it. She had found 2 items she disagreed with and said so, in writing, in a note she left on the report, without commentary. He had called the engineer back. Both items were corrected. He had not mentioned it to her directly. He'd simply left the revised report on the nursing station with a yellow sticky note that said both items addressed, no signature, as if she would have needed one. Isla went home on a Thursday. Maya had expected that to be the end of it. A clean close, a good outcome, back to the 4th floor. She told herself that was fine. It was fine. It was the job. Nicholas Reyes called Margaret on Friday and requested a home nursing arrangement, 2 visits per week for Isla's continued monitoring. Maya found out on Friday afternoon. She appeared in Margaret's office doorway. "You could say no," Margaret said, before Maya could speak. "I know. Do you want to say no?" Maya stood in the doorway for a moment. "No," she said. Margaret's expression did not change. Tuesday and Friday. Car picks you up at 8. The Reyes residence was 40 minutes from the hospital, on the near side of the city. A building that announced itself with the particular restraint of serious money, understated from the outside in a way that required significant resources to achieve. A housekeeper named Donna let her in. The staff were efficient and quiet and treated Maya with a courtesy that felt genuine rather than performed. Nicholas was home on the first Tuesday. He stood in the doorway of the nursery while Maya did the assessment, and she was aware of him, the contained attention of him, the way he tracked everything she did with Isla, without finding it intrusive. Isla, for her part, had continued her habit of turning toward Maya when she came into the room. "She does that," Nicholas said from the doorway. "I know. Does it happen with other patients?" "Sometimes," Maya said. "Infants read emotional regulation. If you're calm, they orient toward you. Are you always calm?" She considered. "When I'm working, and when you're not working." She glanced at him over her shoulder. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, not defensively. Just the posture of a man settling in, the jacket gone, the tie loose. The version of him that existed in this house, rather than in the building with his name on it. "That's a personal question," she said. "It is," he agreed. "You don't have to answer it." She turned back to Isla. "I'm less calm when I'm not working," she said. "I think about things." "What kind of things?" Whether I did everything right. Whether I missed something. A pause. Whether Patricia's observation would have been followed up if I hadn't happened to read it. The silence behind her had a particular quality. "It wouldn't have," he said. "Would it?" "Probably not. That bothers you." "Yes. What would fix it?" She looked at Isla, at the small face, the steady breathing, the way her fingers curled and uncurled in sleep. Better systems. More time for nursing staff to observe without a diagnostic agenda. Less hierarchy between what a specialist says and what a nurse notices. She paused. Things that cost money and will to change. He was quiet for a moment. "Write it down," he said. She turned. "I'm sorry, what you just said. Write it down formally. What the gaps are, what would fix them." He held her gaze. "I fund 3 pediatric programs at St. Ambrose. I'd like to know where the money should actually go." Maya looked at him. "I'm not asking you to fix the entire system," he said. "I'm asking you to tell me what you see. You're better positioned than anyone I've spoken to." "I'm a floor nurse," she said. "You're the person who saved my daughter," he said. "I'd appreciate your perspective." She turned back to Isla, completed the assessment, wrote up her notes with the precise, unhurried care she brought to every chart. On the way out, she stopped at the door. "I'll write it down," she said. He nodded once. She left. In the car on the way back to the hospital, she stared out the window at the city and told herself again that the arrangement was professional. She told herself that with slightly less conviction than she had the week before. She wrote 12 pages. She hadn't intended to write 12 pages. She had intended to write a brief summary, 3 points, maybe 4, the clearest gaps, the most actionable fixes. She sat down on a Sunday afternoon with her laptop and a cup of tea, and 2 hours later, She had 12 pages and a bibliography and 3 case studies drawn from her own experience, anonymized, which she included because she thought the data was clearer than the argument. She read it back. It was good. She knew it was good, not with vanity, but with the plain recognition of someone who had spent 8 years thinking about exactly these problems, and had never had a reason to write them down until now. She emailed it to Nicholas Reyes on a Sunday evening with a subject line that said, "As requested, and no further commentary," because she didn't know what further commentary would look like, and she preferred not to find out. He replied at 11:15 that night. "This is exceptional. Can we discuss it in person?" She stared at the email for a long time. "Yes," she wrote back. "Tuesday." She closed her laptop and went to bed and did not think about it, mostly. Tuesday arrived with the particular efficiency of days you've been not thinking about. The car, Donna, the nursery. Isla, who was doing well, measurably, demonstrably well, her weight up, her responses strong, her sleep architecture normalizing in a way that made Maya's chest do something she didn't examine. After the assessment, Nicholas led her to a room she hadn't been in before, a library. Floor-to-ceiling books on 2 walls, 2 chairs by a window, the city spread out below. A table between the chairs, and on it, her 12 pages, printed, with handwritten annotations in the margins, in the tight, controlled script she recognized from the authorization form. He had read every word. More than that, he had engaged with every word. The annotations were not passive. They asked questions, pushed back on 2 points, extended a third, into a direction she hadn't considered. She sat down and picked up the pages. They talked for 2 hours. It was, she found herself thinking, somewhere in the middle of it, with the slightly vertiginous quality of a realization arriving sideways, the best conversation she had had in years. Not because of what he knew, though he knew more than she had expected. Because of how he listened. The complete, unperformative attention of him. The questions that demonstrated he'd actually heard what she said, rather than waiting for his turn to speak. At one point she disagreed with him, firmly, with her reasoning laid out, and he didn't argue. He considered it, and then he said, "You're right. I was thinking about it wrong." She looked at him. "You seem surprised," he said. "I'm not used to." She stopped. "To what?" "To people with significant resources, conceding a point," she said carefully. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. She was beginning to understand that smiles, for Nicholas Reyes, were a different thing than they were for most people. More considered, more rare. "I find it more efficient than being wrong loudly. Most people disagree, most people," he said, "are more invested in being right than in being correct." She turned a page of her document. "There's a difference. Being right is about the audience. Being correct is about the outcome." A pause. "You're interested in outcomes?" "I'm a nurse," she said. "Outcomes are all there is." He looked at her. And for a moment, just a moment, in the warm light of the library, with her 12 pages between them and the city outside the window, she had the clear, quiet sense of being known by someone. Not completely, not yet, but the beginning of it, which was its own particular thing. She looked back at the document. "Page 9, she said. "The staffing ratio issue. You circled it, but didn't annotate, because I don't have a response yet," he said. "It's the most expensive item. It's the most important one." "I know." He leaned forward. "Walk me through the numbers again." She walked him through the numbers. She learned about it the way she learned most things, by paying attention to the things people didn't say. 4 weeks into the Tuesday-Friday arrangement, she arrived to find the house quieter than usual. Donna let her in with a slightly different expression, careful. The way people's faces get when something is present in a house that they're not discussing. Isla was fine. The assessment was routine. Maya wrote up her notes. She was passing the library on her way out when she saw him. He was sitting at the desk, not working. Just sitting, with a photograph in his hand, looking at it with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the controlled exhaustion of the hospital, not the focused engagement of their conversations, but something underneath all of that. Something that had no management strategy and no efficient response. He hadn't heard her. She should have kept walking. She stopped in the doorway. Mr. Reyes. He looked up. The photograph went face down on the desk with the practiced speed of a man who had long since learned to put things away quickly. The expression went with it. "Miss Chen, I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. I was passing." She hesitated. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She looked at him. "No," he said, after a moment. It came out with the exhaustion of a man who had decided, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, that the efficient response was also the honest one. It's a date. On the calendar. She understood without asking. "Elena," she said quietly, "Isla's mother." She had found the name in the medical notes. "We met in this room," he said. This was her library. The books on the left wall are hers. Maya looked at the books. Art history, poetry, 3 shelves of novels with cracked spines, the kind that had been read and reread. A library that had been loved. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Maya said. "She was difficult," he said, and then, at whatever showed on Maya's face, "I mean that well. She was the only person I have ever known who was more interested in being correct than in being right." Maya was quiet. "She would have liked you," he said, and the plainness of it, the complete absence of calculation, hit her somewhere unguarded. "I'll let myself out," she said. "Maya." She stopped. He had used her first name before, rarely, always in the context of the work, always with the particular care of a man who understood the weight of small things. This was different. "Thank you," he said, for stopping. She nodded. She let herself out and sat in the back of the car and looked at the city and felt the shape of something she had been, carefully not looking at directly, for 4 weeks settle into a form she could no longer pretend wasn't there. She wore the wrong dress. Not wrong in any objective sense, it was perfectly appropriate. A deep navy that she had bought 2 years ago for a hospital fundraiser and worn twice. But when the car arrived at the Reyes Foundation annual benefit and she walked into a room full of women in things that had been made specifically for them, she was aware of the navy dress in the way you become aware of something when it stops being invisible. She had not wanted to come. Nicholas had invited her 3 weeks ago, in the library, in the middle of a conversation about the staffing proposal that had grown, over the intervening weeks, into something more substantial, a formal white paper, co-authored, which his foundation was now in the process of reviewing for potential funding. The invitation had been direct and without decoration. "I'd like you to be there. The proposal will be presented. You should be in the room." She had said yes for professional reasons. She had stood in front of her wardrobe for 20 minutes this evening and told herself it was still for professional reasons. The room was everything she expected, beautiful, expensive, the particular warmth of money directed toward good purposes, mixed with the undeniable fact of its own display. She found her table, introduced herself to the 3 people already seated, accepted a glass of sparkling water. Nicholas found her 12 minutes later. He moved through the room with the ease of a man who had attended 1,000 of these and had arrived, somewhere along the way, at a genuine comfort with them rather than a performed one. He shook hands and made eye contact and stopped for the right amount of time at each conversation. She watched him from across the room and noticed, with the observational habits she had never been able to turn off, the precise point at which he located her. He didn't come over immediately. He finished the conversation he was in, said something that made the group laugh, and then crossed the room toward her with a directness that suggested he'd known exactly where he was going for the last several minutes. "You came," he said. "You invited me. I wasn't certain you would. I said I would." "I know," he said. "I've learned that means something, with you." She held his gaze. "The proposal is being presented at 9. At 9. He looked at her, at the navy dress, at the way she was standing, at all of it, with the attention he gave to everything. "You look, don't," she said, not harshly. He paused. "I was going to say you look like you'd rather be somewhere else." She almost laughed. "I'd rather be checking on the Okonkwo baby. He was discharged last week," Nicholas said, "fully recovered. Margaret sent me the note." She looked at him. "You've been following his case." "You mentioned him," he said simply, "the first night. I wanted to know how it ended." The evening moved around them. The proposal was presented at 9, clearly, compellingly, with the data she had built over 4 weeks, given the platform it deserved. There was applause. There were questions, which Nicholas fielded with the precision of someone who had read every page of the white paper rather than delegating it. After the presentation, a woman in a red dress stopped Maya near the bar. "You're the nurse," she said, not unkindly, with the particular curiosity of someone who was trying to understand a thing that didn't fit their existing categories. "The one who, yes," Maya said. "Nicholas has spoken about you." The woman, board member, Maya guessed, from the way she occupied the room, studied her. "He doesn't speak about people. We work together," Maya said. "Of course," the woman said, with a smile that meant something else entirely. Later, near the end of the evening, Nicholas appeared beside her at the window. "The woman in red," Maya said. "Board member." "Chair," he said. "Catherine. She's known me for 15 years. She told me you'd spoken about me." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city glittered in the particular way of cities at night, beautiful and indifferent, and full of lit windows behind which things were happening that no one outside could see. "I mentioned the proposal," he said. "Is that all you mentioned?" Another pause. "Longer." "No," he said. She looked at the window. "Maya," he said. "We should," she started. "I know," he said. "I know what. I find I'm less interested in what we should do than I was 4 weeks ago." She was quiet. "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I'm telling you something true. Because you've told me true things consistently, and I think you deserve the same." She looked at him. The room hummed around them. The city glittered outside. Somewhere across the floor, Catherine in the red dress was watching with the expression of someone who already knew how the story ended. "I need to think," Maya said. "I know," he said. "Take the time." She took 11 days. She was aware of the number. She thought, more than once, that it was the same number of days Isla had spent in the hospital, and that this was either meaningless or the kind of detail that meant something about how her mind was organizing the experience, and that either way, she wasn't going to examine it too closely. She went to work. She checked on her patients. She had dinner with her friend B on a Wednesday, who had known her for 12 years and listened to 45 minutes of careful, circular reasoning before setting down her fork and saying, "Maya, do you like him? It's complicated. Do you like him? Yes. Is he a good person?" She thought about a man who had said, "I'm asking, not arranging," who had corrected himself in front of her, who had sat in a library with a photograph of his dead wife on a hard day and told the truth about it when she asked, who had followed up on the Okonkwo baby because she had mentioned him once in passing. "Yes," she said. "Then what's complicated?" "Everything else," she said. B picked her fork back up. "Everything else," she said, "is a reason to be careful. Not a reason to say no before you've even started." Maya went home and sat in her apartment and looked at her ceiling for a long time. The things that separated them were real, not the money. Money was a circumstance, not a character. But the world he moved in and the world she moved in were genuinely different. And the ways in which they were different would require ongoing navigation rather than a single solved problem. She had seen enough of him to know he understood that. She'd seen enough of him to know he would navigate it honestly. The thing she kept coming back to, in the end, was not any of the complicated things. It was Isla turning toward her in the crib. It was 12 pages written on a Sunday afternoon that had become a white paper that was going to change how 3 pediatric programs were funded. It was a sticky note that said both items addressed with no signature because he had known she would know. It was a man who had said you deserve the same and meant the truth. She picked up her phone. She called his direct number. He had given it to her in the 3rd week for clinical questions, which they both understood was not the only reason. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Maya, I've thought about it," she said. A pause. "And I'd like to have dinner," she said. "Not at a gala, not professionally, just dinner." The silence that followed was not long. But it had a quality she recognized, the quality of a person who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has just very carefully set it down. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. The restaurant was quiet and not expensive in a way that was clearly deliberate, she understood, when she arrived. That he had chosen it for her rather than for him, had looked for something that would feel like a conversation rather than a display, and had found it. She was there first. He arrived 3 minutes later without a jacket, and sat across from her, with the ease of a man who had spent the last 11 days finding somewhere to put the anticipation, and had arrived, finally, at the place where it could simply be what it was. "You were here first," he said. "I'm always early." "I know," he said. "I've noticed." The dinner lasted 3 hours. She learned things she hadn't known. That he had grown up without money and spent the first 30 years of his life being afraid of running out of it before he had arrived. Somewhere in the middle of building his company, at the realization that the fear had become its own kind of prison. That he had learned to cook during the year after Elena died, because Isla needed someone in the kitchen, and the chef he had hired had not understood what an 8-month-old needed. That he read the books on the left wall of the library still, slowly, one at a time, because it felt like a conversation he wasn't ready to end. She told him things she hadn't told many people, that she had wanted to be a doctor and had not become one because her family had needed her income sooner than a medical degree would have allowed, and that she had arrived, over 8 years, at a genuine preference for nursing over medicine because she was better at the watching than the diagnosing. That the Okonkwo case had cost her professionally. 2 of the 4 specialists had filed formal complaints about scope of practice that had required Margaret to spend significant political capital to resolve. That she had never once regretted it. "The complaints," he said. "That was never in any record I saw." "It wouldn't be," she said. "Margaret handled it internally. Does it still affect you?" "It affects how carefully I document things," she said. Which is probably the correct response. He looked at her for a moment. "It should affect more than that. What was done to you professionally, Nicholas?" He stopped. "I'm not telling you so you can fix it," she said. "I'm telling you because you told me true things, and I'm telling you true things back." He held her gaze. And then slowly, with the particular quality of a man accepting a boundary that had been offered in good faith. Okay, she said. They walked after dinner through the neighborhood, which was quiet at 10 at night, the streets wet from a rain that had come and gone while they were inside. He didn't take her hand. They walked with a foot of space between them and talked about Isla, about the white paper, about a book she had found on his library shelf and borrowed without asking, and returned with a note. "You wrote in the margins," he said. "In pencil," she said. "I can erase them." "Don't," he said. They stopped at the corner where her street met his. He looked at her. She looked at him. The city did what the city does. Moved, hummed, continued, indifferent. "This is good," he said. "Whatever this is, it is," she said. "I'm not in a hurry," he said. "I want you to know that." She nodded. "Good night, Maya. Good night, Nicholas." She walked home in the wet street, quiet, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like she was not moving against the current of something. 3 months later, on a Tuesday, she arrived at the house to find Isla standing, not walking, standing, one hand gripping the rail of her playpen, wobbling with the enormous concentration of a person who had recently discovered that her legs were, in fact, capable of this, and was not yet entirely sure she trusted them. Maya stopped in the doorway of the nursery. Isla looked up and turned toward her. "She's been doing that for 3 days," Nicholas said from behind her. "Standing. She hasn't taken a step yet, but he paused. "She's thinking about it. She'd do it when she's ready," Maya said. "Yes," he said. "She will." She crossed the room and crouched beside the playpen, and Isla reached out and grabbed her finger with the complete, trusting grip of a baby who had decided, on no particular evidence except instinct, that this was a person worth holding on to. "Hello," Maya said softly. Isla made a sound that was not quite a word, but was clearly directed at her, and pulled her finger and wobbled and held on. "She's going to walk," Nicholas said. He was standing in the doorway, his house, his daughter, with an expression Maya had come to recognize over 3 months of Tuesday mornings and Friday afternoons and dinners that had become a regular thing, and conversations in the library that had become the best part of her week. It was the expression of a man who had stopped being afraid of feeling things. "She's going to walk," Maya agreed. She looked up at him. He looked back at her across the nursery, across the space between where he stood and where she crouched, across the months and the 12 pages and the library and the restaurant and all the small, true things that had accumulated between them into something solid and real. Isla pulled her finger again. Maya laughed. And in the doorway, Nicholas Reyes, who had spent the better part of 3 years not doing it, smiled. Isla took her first steps on a Wednesday. Maya wasn't there. She was on the 4th floor when it happened, the 4th floor, where the vending machine outside room 4 and 12 had finally been fixed, which Maya knew because Nicholas had arranged it quietly 3 months ago after she mentioned it in passing, the way he arranged things when he understood that something mattered. She found out because her phone buzzed during a chart review, a video, 12 seconds. Isla in the middle of the living room floor, taking 3 wobbling steps toward the camera before sitting down abruptly and looking extremely pleased with herself. Beneath it, a message: "She did it. Wish you were here." Maya watched the video twice, then she wrote back, "I'll be there Friday." She put her phone away and went back to the chart, and the 4th floor continued its particular life around her. The plastic chairs, the family in room 408 who had been there for 2 weeks, the patient in 411 whose case she had been thinking about in the way she thought about cases that didn't quite fit the diagnosis on the chart. She would look at it more closely later. She would sit beside the bed and watch. She would pay attention. It was, she had come to understand, over 8 years and 1 extraordinary winter, the most important thing she knew how to do. Not the fixing that came after. And sometimes it came, and sometimes it didn't, and you learned to live with both. The watching. The full, uninterrupted presence of someone who understood that the person in front of them was the whole point. She finished the chart. She went to room 411, she pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. And she watched.